Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into the lean startup. This book, it's become a bit of a modern classic for innovators. But here's the thing. It's not just some
Sure.
Silicon Valley tech manual. Not at all.
Right.
It's about navigating uncertainty, which, let's be real, it's something we all deal with, no matter what, like whether you're launching a company or just, you know, trying to figure out what to do next in your career.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting to see how the principles in this book, they've kind of found their way into all sorts of fields, really. Like you see it in healthcare, you even see it in government now.
It's everywhere.
It's pretty remarkable. I think what's really at the heart of it is it challenges that traditional approach to business planning, where you spend months and months crafting this perfect plan, only to realize that it was built on a foundation of, well, assumptions that maybe weren't so accurate.
Yeah, you think you've got it all figured out.
Exactly.
And then, boom, curveball.
Yeah, and the author knows this firsthand, too. He actually opens the book with a pretty candid account of his own.
Yeah.
Startup flop. You'd think, the guy who writes the book on startups would have it all smooth sailing, right?
Right. You'd think.
Not quite. He actually talks about feeling completely lost, like he was doing everything by the book, quote unquote,
Out.
but still heading straight for a brick wall.
Ouch.
Yeah, and it was this experience, this really tough experience. That actually led him to develop the lean startup methodology, this structured approach to testing those assumptions early and often.
So it's not about avoiding failure, really. It's about learning from it as quickly as possible.
Precisely. The book really hammers home this idea of validated learning as the key metric of progress. It's not just about like how much money you've raised or how many users you have, but it's about what you've learned about your customers and your market.
That's a good point.
That's what really matters.
And this is where the book really challenges traditional business thinking. I loved that anecdote about, I think it was the U.S. Army CIO, and he almost failed to convince them about lean startup principles.
Oh, yeah. That's a great story.
Yeah. If even the Army can benefit from this approach, it's got to have pretty broad implications.
Totally. If the Army can be lean, anyone can. It's
Yeah.
about adapting, right?
Yeah.
Being flexible.
Okay. So how does this validated learning actually work in practice? Like, walk us through it.
So the book introduces this idea of the build, measure, learn feedback loop. So picture this cycle where you start by building like a minimum viable product. Then you get it out there and measure how customers respond to it. And then you use that data to learn and inform your next iteration.
So it's about getting your product, or at least a version of it, out there as soon as possible to test your assumptions, rather than, holing up in a room trying to perfect something that no one might even want.
Exactly. It's about getting real feedback,
Yeah.
right, from real people. And there's a great example in the book about IMVU. They started as this 3D avatar platform with the assumption that people would want to use it to connect with, like existing friends. But then they put it out there, and guess what? Customers were way more interested in meeting new people.
Wow, that's a big difference.
It was a huge learning experience for them,
Yeah.
and it completely shifted their strategy.
So they had to, pivot based on what customers were actually doing.
Exactly, not what they thought they would do. And this is a key point, right? Sometimes the most brilliant ideas on paper totally fall flat when they meet the reality of the market. And the lean startup, it's all about adjusting to that reality quickly and efficiently.
Makes sense. Speaking of adjusting, the book also highlights this cool story about Intuit, the company behind TurboTax, and how they created a product that was, as disruptive as SnapTax.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
So how did this massive established company pull off something so innovative?
It's a great example of entrepreneurship, fostering a startup mindset within a larger organization. Intuit realized that their existing structures, they might stifle innovation, so they basically created this small, nimble team.
Yeah.
And they gave them permission to operate like a mini startup inside the company.
So they were able to experiment, get direct customer feedback, iterate much faster than they could with the usual corporate bureaucracy.
Absolutely. And the result was a product that totally revolutionized tax filing. It's a powerful lesson for anyone trying to drive innovation, really, whether you're in a tiny startup or a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, it's inspiring. So let's dive a little deeper into some of the core elements of this methodology. The book talks a lot about minimum viable products, or MVPs. This seems to be one of the most misunderstood concepts out there. People think it means releasing a half-baked product, but that's not really it, right?
Right. It's definitely not about shipping something that's low quality or unfinished.
Yeah.
An MVP is about validating learning, not just, shipping something for the sake of shipping. And the book uses some really interesting examples to illustrate this, like Groupon. You know Groupon, right? They started with handmade PDFs and pizza coupons.
Wow, seriously.
Yeah, can you imagine that, being the foundation of a billion-dollar company?
It's mind-blowing.
It is. But it highlights this key point, right? It's not about bells and whistles at this stage. It's about getting that core value proposition out there and seeing if it resonates.
If it solves a problem.
Exactly. And there's another great example with Dropbox. Instead of spending months perfecting their file syncing technology, they made this simple video explaining the concept.
So their initial MVP was basically like marketing material.
Yeah, essentially. But it worked. The video went viral, and they got this huge wait list of potential customers. And that gave them the validation they needed to actually build a product. They knew they had tapped into real customer demand.
That's a smart move.
It's a low-risk way to test the waters, right, before diving in head first. The book also mentions this company called Food on the Table and their concierge MVP.
Oh, yeah, tell me about that.
Oh, it's brilliant. So they wanted to create this service that helped families plan meals and grocery shop, efficiently. But instead of building this big, complicated app right away, they actually acted as, like, human concierges.
Wow, so they were like doing the work themselves.
Manually, yeah, for a small group of customers just to test their assumptions.
That's dedication.
It is. It's a great example of how an MVP can be super simple and still provide these incredibly valuable insights. The key is to get through that build, measure, learn loop as quickly as possible, right? With the least amount of effort.
So you've built your MVP, you're getting feedback. Now you need to figure out what it all means. This is where innovation accounting comes in.
Right. It's about moving beyond those vanity metrics, the ones that look impressive on paper, but don't actually tell you if you're building a sustainable business. The book talks about this company Grocket, an education tech company, and how they got caught up in the wrong metrics. And it led them down a path of, well, wasted effort, despite what looked like positive growth.
So what are the right metrics? What should people be paying attention to?
The book really emphasizes the importance of actionable metrics. These are metrics that actually guide your decisions. So instead of just tracking, say, the total number of users, you might track the percentage of users who engage in a specific behavior that's crucial to your business model.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality.
Exactly. It's about understanding what behaviors actually drive value. For example, if you're a social media platform, it's less about how many people signed up and more about how many are actively posting, connecting with friends, engaging with content.
The ones who are really using it.
Right. Those actions, they indicate real engagement, the kind that leads to long-term growth.
I see, yeah. And the book also mentions cohort analysis.
Oh, yes. Cohort analysis is a fantastic way to track groups of users over time, to see how their behavior changes. So imagine you can segment your users by, like, when they joined, and then you analyze their journey through your product or service. Are they progressing as you expected? Where are they dropping off?
Ah, so it's about identifying patterns, spotting potential problems, hopefully early on.
Exactly. And ultimately figuring out how to retain customers, keep them coming back.
Okay. So we've talked about building MVPs, measuring progress with the right metrics, this whole idea of validated learning. Let's say you've been diligently gathering all this data, but the numbers just aren't, adding up. You're not seeing the traction you expected. This is where things get tough.
It is.
You have to decide whether to pivot or persevere.
It's a tough decision. It's one of the most challenging, but also one of the most crucial decisions that a startup or any innovator really has to face.
Yeah, it's a big one. And the book really emphasizes that pivoting. It's not a sign of failure, right? It's a sign of adaptability.
Right. It's about being humble enough to acknowledge that your initial assumptions were wrong and having the courage to change course.
Being flexible. And the book gives some great examples of companies that made really successful pivots, often in the face of some serious challenges, like Votizen, for instance. They started as a social network for verified voters.
Oh, yeah. Interesting idea.
Right, aiming to empower people to engage in the political process. But something wasn't clicking.
Well, they were initially targeting individual voters with, a B2C model. But after months of testing and iterating, they realized that that model wasn't really sustainable.
So what did they do? Give up?
No, they pivoted to a B2B model. They realized that political organizations were a much more receptive market for their technology.
So they went from trying to reach like millions of individuals to focusing on a smaller number of organizations who could then use their platform to reach larger audiences.
Exactly. It was a bold move, but it was based on real-world feedback
Yeah.
and a deep understanding of their target market.
And it ultimately led to their acquisition, right, by a larger company. So even though they pivoted, they still found success.
They did, and it highlights another key point, right?
Right.
Sometimes the best path to achieving your vision, it's not a straight line. It might involve twists and turns, even some radical course corrections along the way.
Sometimes you got to zigzag.
Exactly.
And another great pivot example from the book is Wealthfront. They started with this vision of democratizing access to like sophisticated financial advice, targeting amateur investors.
Yeah, I remember that.
But as they tested their assumptions, they discovered that professional money managers, they were actually a much more receptive market.
Interesting.
So they pivoted from serving individuals to empowering professionals.
That's a pretty big shift.
It is, but it allowed them to tap into this much larger market, and it led to significant growth.
That's the power of pivoting.
These stories really highlight how pivoting, again, it's not about abandoning your vision. It's about finding the best path to achieving it.
It's about being adaptable.
Yeah, sometimes that means making a major change, and sometimes it means making small adjustments along the way.
And speaking of adjustments, this is where the book draws inspiration from a rather unexpected source.
Oh, tell me more.
Toyota's approach to car production.
Okay.
It introduces this concept of the power of small batches.
How do car manufacturing and startups connect?
It's all about finding a balance between efficiency and quality, right? The book uses this simple example that I think we can all relate to, stuffing envelopes. So imagine you have 100 envelopes to stuff with letters, seal, and address. You could do each step in one big batch, right? Stuff all the envelopes, then seal all the envelopes, then address all the envelopes.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty logical way to do it.
It might seem efficient on the surface, but it's actually more prone to errors. What if you get halfway through and realize you've been putting the wrong letter in the envelopes?
Oh, no.
You've just wasted a ton of time. Now imagine taking a small batch approach. You stuff one envelope, seal it, address it, then move on to the next. If you make a mistake, you catch it immediately, and you only have to redo one envelope, not 100.
That makes a lot of sense. But how does this apply to, like, software development or product design?
The same principle applies. The book uses the example of IMVU. Again, they shifted from working on these large, complex features that took months to develop to smaller, more manageable features that they could ship to customers within days or even hours.
So instead of having these long development cycles with infrequent releases,
Right.
they had a constant stream of small improvements, each one tested and validated by real users.
Exactly. It allowed them to iterate more quickly, respond to customer feedback more effectively, and ultimately create a product that was much more aligned with their users' needs.
Agile.
Exactly. And it's not just IMVU either. There are other examples in the book outside of the tech world.
Oh, tell me more. I'm always fascinated by how these principles can be applied beyond, like, Silicon Valley.
Well, the book highlights a surgical guidewire company that drastically reduced their prototype development time by using 3D printing and this small batch process.
So instead of waiting weeks or months for a prototype, they could create and test new designs much faster.
Exactly. It allowed them to get feedback from surgeons much earlier in the design process, led to a better final product. The book even talks about the potential of small batches in education, with examples like School of One, where students have personalized learning plans that are constantly adjusted based on their needs and their progress.
It's incredible how this principle, which, originated in the manufacturing world, can be applied so broadly. It really speaks to the power of breaking things down into smaller steps and constantly seeking feedback to make sure you're on the right track.
Absolutely. Feedback is crucial.
What happens when you've got a product that's resonating with customers and you're ready to, to scale? How do you go from those early adopters to sustainable growth?
That's where this concept of engines of growth comes in. And this is where things get really interesting. So the book, it breaks down growth into four main engines, I guess you could call them.
Okay.
You got sticky, you got viral, you got paid, and then sales-driven.
All right.
Each one has unique characteristics.
Yeah.
And needs its own kind of approach. It's like choosing the right vehicle for a journey.
Yeah, I like that.
A sports car might be great for a quick sprint, but But if you're hauling, heavy loads, you need a truck.
Makes sense. So it's about understanding what kind of vehicle, so to speak, your business needs to reach its goals.
Exactly. So let's start with sticky engines. These companies, they really focus on customer retention, you know, making their products so engaging, so valuable that people stick around.
For the long haul.
Got it. Think about like Netflix or Spotify, right?
Yeah.
The whole goal is to keep you hooked on their platform, keep you coming back for more.
So it's about creating something so good that people can't imagine living without it.
Exactly. And how do they measure that success? Well, one key metric for sticky engines is churn rate.
Churn rate.
The percentage of customers who cancel their subscriptions each month. The lower the churn rate, the stickier that engine.
Right. So if people are sticking around, they're happy.
Exactly. So then you have your viral engines, and these seem to be all the rage these days.
Yeah, everyone wants to go viral.
They rely on word of mouth and social sharing, right?
Yeah.
To spread quickly.
Like wildfire.
Exactly. Think about like Facebook or Instagram. Their growth, it's fueled by users inviting friends, sharing content, basically doing the marketing for them.
So you're basically getting free marketing.
The best kind of marketing. And you measure the success of a viral engine with what's called the viral coefficient, which is how many new users each existing user brings to the platform.
The higher the number, the faster the growth.
Faster the growth, yeah. If each user brings in 2 more users, and those each bring in 2 more, and so on, you get exponential growth. It's powerful stuff.
That makes sense. What about paid engines? Those seem, I don't know, maybe a little more straightforward.
Yeah, paid engines leverage advertising and other marketing channels to reach new customers. Think about companies that run ads on Google, Facebook, even things like sponsoring content on YouTube or podcasts like ours. They're paying to get in front of potential customers.
Reaching a wider audience.
Yeah, and I imagine the key metric here is all about cost effectiveness.
Right, making sure you're getting a return on your investment.
Exactly. So they track things like customer acquisition cost.
CAC.
Yeah, CAC. How much it costs to acquire a new customer. The lower the CAC, the more efficient that engine.
So you want to keep that CAC low.
As low as possible.
Yeah.
All right, now let's talk about that last engine, the sales-driven engine.
Right.
These companies, they rely on a direct sales force to close deals, right? To really work with customers. It's common in industries like enterprise software or complex financial products where the sales process is a bit more involved.
A little more hands-on.
Yeah, they're focused on building those relationships, understanding customer needs, and demonstrating that value of their product or service.
And how do they measure success?
They track things like sales cycle length, which is basically how long it takes to close a deal, and customer lifetime value, or CLTV, which measures the total revenue a customer generates over their lifetime with the company.
So it's about finding those high-value customers.
Yeah.
And building those long-term relationships.
Exactly. Nurturing those relationships for the long haul. This whole concept of engines of growth, it's pretty fascinating, right?
It is. It really highlights how there's no, one-size-fits-all approach to building a successful business.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that some companies might actually use a combination of these engines at different stages of their development.
So you might switch it up depending on where you are.
Exactly. Like they might start with a viral engine to build early awareness, right?
Yeah.
Then switch to a paid engine to scale quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually maybe incorporate a sales-driven approach to target larger customers.
So it's about being flexible, choosing the right tools for the job.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot, from testing assumptions and building MVPs to measuring progress and choosing the right engine of growth. But as a company grows, evolves, it needs more than just the right tactics, right? It needs a culture, a structure that can support innovation and adaptation. This is where adaptive organizations come in.
Right, and this is crucial because an adaptive organization is designed to learn and evolve quickly, responding to changes in the market, to customer feedback. With agility, they have structures and processes that encourage experimentation. They embrace failure as a learning opportunity, and they empower teams to make decisions quickly.
So it's like the opposite of those rigid, hierarchical organizations where everything moves at a snail's pace.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being nimble, being responsive.
Yeah.
And the book emphasizes the importance of techniques like the 5 whys
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
to foster a culture of learning and continuous improvement.
Remind me how the 5 whys works.
It's pretty simple, but it's a powerful tool for root cause analysis. When a problem comes up, instead of just addressing the symptom, you keep asking why.
Mm.
ideally 5 times, to really get to that underlying cause.
You keep digging deeper until you get to the root of the issue.
Exactly. And it helps you uncover those hidden assumptions or process flaws that might be contributing to the problem. And the book gives a great example of how Intuit used the 5 whys to improve their QuickBooks product.
QuickBooks, yeah.
They were dealing with declining customer satisfaction, sales were dropping, so they brought together a team of engineers, product managers, even some customers to figure out what was going on.
I bet that was an interesting conversation.
Oh yeah, a lot of different perspectives in the room. And by asking why 5 times, they uncovered a few key things.
Right.
One was that their development cycles, they were too long, and their batch sizes, they were too big. And this was slowing down their ability to respond to feedback.
So they were kind of stuck in that old school approach of releasing big updates infrequently instead of iterating quickly and incorporating feedback as they went.
Exactly. And they realized that their teams were too siloed, which was, hindering communication and collaboration.
So they were tripping over their own internal processes.
Yeah, essentially. So what did they do? Well, they made some big changes. They shifted to smaller, more agile teams. They adopted shorter development cycles. They embraced a much more customer-centric approach.
Sounds like they took a page from the lean startup.
They did.
Mm.
And the results were pretty remarkable. They saw a big improvement in customer satisfaction, and sales went up. It's a great example of how a company, even a large, established company, can transform its culture and its processes to become more adaptive and innovative.
It gives me hope for those big companies that are struggling to keep up with all the change. They see these nimble startups disrupting their industries, and it can feel, I don't know, kind of hopeless sometimes.
Yeah, you can feel stuck, for sure.
Like, how do you even begin to compete? So what does the lean startup have to say about fostering innovation within those big organizations?
Well, that's where this concept of the innovation sandbox comes in. So imagine this contained environment, right, inside a company, where teams can experiment freely,
Right.
without, disrupting the core business.
So it's like giving them a safe space to play, to try new things, even fail, without derailing everything.
Exactly. It's a safe space to experiment. And the book uses this example of a company that's struggling to decide on the right pricing for their product. They had mountains of data.
But no idea what to do with it.
Analysis paralysis, right? And this is where the innovation sandbox came in. They basically created a sandbox around their pricing page. They gave this small team the authority to experiment with different pricing models and track the results using those actionable metrics that we talked about earlier.
So it's like a controlled experiment.
Exactly. And because it was contained to this specific part of their website, they could test those assumptions, learn from real customer behavior without risking the entire business. It's a way to bring that startup mentality inside a larger organization.
It's like a little mini startup.
Exactly.
It sounds like the innovation sandbox. It's all about empowering teams, giving them the autonomy, the resources to move fast and make bold decisions.
And to learn from those decisions,
Right.
whether they succeed or fail.
It's fascinating how the lean startup addresses both ends of the spectrum, really, the scrappy startup and the huge corporation. It shows that these principles, they can be applied across different contexts, different industries.
It's about mindset more than anything, right? Adopting this scientific experimental approach, no matter what you're building, no matter what challenges you're facing.
Yeah, it's about being open to learning and adapting.
Right.
So we've talked about building a culture of innovation, embracing experimentation, empowering teams. But there's one concept from the book that we haven't touched on yet that I find really, really interesting.
Oh.
The idea of a long-term stock exchange.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
The long-term stock exchange, or LTSE. It's a really interesting idea. I mean, it challenges a lot of the deeply ingrained notions of how businesses should operate.
Yeah, it seems like we hear all the time about companies prioritizing short-term profits and shareholder value above all else, sometimes even, ethical considerations.
Right. It's interesting because the author, he argues that this short-term focus, it can actually stifle innovation. If a company's always under pressure to deliver those immediate returns, they're much less likely to invest in those riskier, longer-term bets that often lead to breakthroughs.
So the LTSC, it's designed to incentivize a different kind of behavior, more, I don't know, a more sustainable kind of behavior.
Yeah, exactly. It would create a market where companies are rewarded for making decisions that prioritize long-term value creation, even if it means, maybe sacrificing some short-term gains.
It's like the opposite of how Wall Street usually works.
Right. It aligns with the core principles of the lean startup,
Mm-hmm.
you know, focusing on validated learning, building sustainable businesses, creating value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders.
Yeah, stakeholders, not just shareholders. That's a big one.
It is. And it's a radical idea, but, it suggests that there's a different way to think about capitalism, a way that prioritizes long-term sustainability, societal impact.
It's refreshing. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. We've talked about validated learning, building MVPs, measuring the right metrics, choosing those engines of growth, creating adaptive organizations, and even, rethinking how our financial markets work.
Phew. Yeah, that's a lot.
It's been quite the journey through the lean startup, but now, I want to kind of turn it over to you, the listener. What does this all mean for you? Whether you're, an entrepreneur, a manager, someone who's just curious about innovation, what are the key takeaways you can apply to your own work, to your life? What resonates with you?
I think for me, one of the most powerful takeaways is this idea of challenging your assumptions.
Mm.
We all have these biases, these preconceived notions that shape how we see the world. But the lean startup, it really encourages us to question those assumptions, to get out of our comfort zones, to seek out data, feedback that might challenge our beliefs.
That's like being open to being wrong.
Exactly. And it's not just about challenging our own assumptions. It's about creating a culture where other people feel safe to do the same.
Mm.
Whether you're leading a team or just having a conversation with a friend, create a space
Mhm.
where people can express their ideas, challenge those assumptions, explore new possibilities.
Yeah, create that space for open dialogue. Another big takeaway, and I think this is key, is to focus on learning, not just execution. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle of everyday life, to just focus on like checking things off a to-do list. But the lean startup, it reminds us that the most valuable thing we can do is to learn, to adapt.
It's about the journey, not just the destination. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's about realizing that failure, it's okay. It's inevitable as long as we learn from it, as long as we iterate.
Yeah, failure is just feedback, right? It's an opportunity to learn and grow.
So we need to shift our perspective. Instead of fearing failure, we should see it as a chance to gain those valuable insights, to course correct along the way.
And remember, you're not alone in this journey.
Yeah.
We can learn from each other's experiences too.
Exactly. So, read books, listen to podcasts, talk to people who have different perspectives than you. The more we learn, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the uncertainty of the world, to make those informed decisions.
And to build something truly great.
And remember that idea of building an MVP, a minimum viable product. Don't let perfectionism hold you back. Focus on getting something out there quickly so you can gather that feedback, validate those assumptions.
And remember, an MVP doesn't have to be fancy, right? It can be a landing page, a prototype, a simple survey.
It can even just be a conversation.
Exactly. The goal is to learn as quickly as possible with the least amount of effort.
So we've talked about mindset, we've talked about learning, taking action, but none of this is possible without a way to measure our progress. And the lean startup talks a lot about tracking the right metrics, right? Those metrics that actually tell you if you're on the right track.
Yeah, those actionable metrics. Avoid those vanity metrics.
Yeah.
The ones that make you feel good but don't actually give you any real insights.
And the book has this great framework, the 3 A's of good metrics.
Oh, yeah. Actionable, accessible, and auditable.
I love that. So simple, so easy to remember. But it's not enough to just know what to measure. You also have to, be willing to act on that data, even if it means making some tough choices.
Right, and that's where that pivot or persevere decision comes in.
Exactly. Do you stay the course or do you change direction? It can be a really tough call, but it's a crucial one. And the lean startup reminds us that pivoting, it's not failure, it's adaptability.
It's about being honest with yourself and having the courage to make a change when it's needed.
And even if you decide to persevere, it doesn't mean being rigid. It means constantly iterating, tweaking, improving based on what you learn.
Always learning, always adapting.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the lean startup, I want to leave you, the listener, with a question. If you could apply just one of these principles to your own work, to your life, which one would it be and why?
It's a question worth thinking about. What experiment could you run, maybe even today, to start validating those assumptions, to start learning, to start moving closer to those goals?
Remember, even the longest journey, it all starts with a single step. There's always more to learn, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.